Good afternoon, everyone. And I realize I'm working with post-lunch carb fatigue, so I'd like to ask the whole audience to give a huge round of applause for all of our ancestors, all the dead people who matter, all the grandparents, the loved ones we've lost. A huge round of applause for all those people. That's awesome. So I come from a tradition of welcoming the ancestors into the room, and my story is the story of a 12-year-old gay boy, pretty scared, not sure what was going on, hearing about the death of Harvey Milk, a San Francisco politician, a supervisor, who was assassinated by another supervisor in San Francisco in November of 1978. And Harvey stood for the most important things. He said, "You gotta give him hope." That was his main message. He said, "You've gotta come out." And even more than that, he said, we as gay people have to be more than just about gay people. We have to be about liberation for the unions, for the farm workers, for people of color. He was a brilliant guy way before his time. And what a tragedy that he was assassinated. 12 years old, there I was. I knew the story was about me. I was also going to bar mitzvahs. And at the synagogues, I noticed the yahrzeit lights, the little lamps that lit up to honor the anniversary of the death of a beloved Jewish ancestor. I thought that's cool. Even at that time, I thought it was cool to acknowledge ancestors. And as I continued into my adulthood, I went to Brown University. I finally read the first biography of Harvey Milk. I learned this incredible story, and I was inspired. And somehow, when the AOL nicknames first came out and the different ways that you could name yourself online happened, I thought, I'm going to call myself Harvey Milk. Now, this was a time before anyone really knew who he was. Most gay people didn't even know who he was. But somehow I felt it resonated with me, his story resonated with me, that I was going to take on his name, being Harvey Milk in the internet, and seeing what that was like. It was fun. Some people wrote, "Harvey, we thought you were dead." You know, some people challenged me and said, "Don't you have a lot of chutzpah to say that you're Harvey Milk?" And it got me thinking, even at that young age in my 20s, of like, do I have the right to take on this name of a dead person? And somehow I just decided I did have the right, but that I wanted to do it in an ethical way. And to be Harvey Milk online meant that I had to represent who he was, represent this broad vision of gay politics, this broad vision of commitment of what it meant to be a citizen in San Francisco and the world. So with that inspiration, I not only took on the name, but I began engaging with people on the different gay chat rooms. And when I think back to like Usenet, all of these ancient technologies of 20 years ago, where I made many of the friends who are now resources for me in my community organizing. But they knew me as Harvey Milk, not as Chris Bartlett. And what a strange thing. And for a long time, I really didn't get used to being Chris Bartlett on the web. I was used to being Harvey Milk and having people relate to me that way. And so, as the AIDS epidemic hit my life, and I was on a trajectory to be a Latin professor, and then the AIDS epidemic hit, I lost 5 close friends in 1989, and I decided, you know, I love reading Latin, but I'm going to go be a gay activist and fight this epidemic. And suddenly, dozens of friends were dying. And so again, death coming into my life as a gay man and thinking, how powerful is it that these gay people are dying and these incredible stories, and how can I celebrate them? And so Jewish culture came in again, and I researched the Shoah and the way that Jews insisted upon honoring every single person who'd been murdered in the Holocaust, researching their life stories, documenting entire villages. And so, just as Rabbi Lightstone said, I wanted to be a lamplighter, to recognize all of the gay men who had died in the AIDS epidemic, to believe that every single story of those men was worth preserving. Because in American culture, we don't spend that much time thinking about ancestors or dead people. We focus on people's lives. What difference are they making now? But my instinct was, I had met some of these men who had died, and I knew what a huge transformation they'd created in their communities. And I refused to believe that that transformation died when they died. I'd seen it with Harvey Milk. I'd seen the difference that his story had made in my life. So I began a project to acknowledge all the gay men who had died of AIDS in Philadelphia. I created a wiki. And of the 4,600 gay men who've died of AIDS, I've documented 1,000 of those lives. So this has become a trend with me. I love dead people. I'm just one of those weird people who loves dead people and wants to learn everything I can about them. And the real question for me as I've gone on is to think about what are the ethics, really coming back to. And you know, I'm not a scholar of branding. I don't even really know the terminology or the technology. But I prefer the idea of representing as opposed to, like somehow branding the dead sounds a little bit weird. but representing the dead and representing what they stood for, and not just using them for gain. So I think one of the ethical questions is taking on the name of a dead person, I think, should be a non-profit effort as opposed to a for-profit one. But who gets to have the chutzpah to say they're going to be Harvey Milk? You know, is it too soon to say who's going to get to be Steve Jobs? Like, what an incredible story. Who gets to represent Steve Jobs after his death as an ancestor, as a story? Who's representing Alexander Graham Bell, the Steve Jobs of a century ago? But to begin to think that each of us can take on the internet, representing the life of a dead person who matters to us. And I think part of the advantage for me was that coming into this early on in my youth and taking on Harvey Milk before there was a movie about him, you know, even though people did question my reasons for why I would do this, since I started out at a relatively young age and I really had no reason to do it other than I loved this guy and I wanted to tell his story, people questioned me less. But what if you were to be Malcolm X? Or what if you were to be Emma Goldman? I think you get a lot more pushback. How dare you? Who are you to say that you could be Emma Goldman? But what if we got together and had a conversation about who gets to represent those people? And I've often thought, if someone came to me and said, Chris, I don't think you're doing a really good job with Harvey Milk on Twitter, and some weeks I feel that way, like I'm not living up. We just heard the importance of Twitter as a conversation. And I get tweets from young people who are struggling with coming out. I get tweets from organizers from all kinds of movements saying, will you retweet this thing I'm doing? Just because my name's Harvey Milk, you know, that they resonate with what he stood for, this gay liberation vision of multiple movements. So I feel it's my responsibility to retweet and engage and connect with these young people and sometimes old people who are still coming out of the closet, because I think that that's what Harvey Milk would have done. He would have been there in that way. He would have been there with that gay liberation vision, and that I hold myself as much as possible to that accountability. But I could imagine a young person, as they will, come say to me, you're not doing a very good job, and to think now that I might embrace a few other men and women who want to do Harvey Milk with me and maybe share the Twitter password with 4 or 5 or 6 other people. Now, no one's ever asked to do this for me, but I'd like to think that I'd be open to it, that I'm not the only voice for Harvey Milk, just as there would be more than one voice for Emma Goldman or Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. But I leave you with this thought. If you were to choose one ancestor, one dead person who you'd really like to celebrate, whether that's on Twitter or Facebook, using technology or just in your communities, who would you choose? And what would be your level of commitment to ensuring that their story is fully told out in the world? Because I'll tell you, it will make a difference. I've seen it. Even someone like Harvey Milk, who's relatively unknown outside of the gay world, the difference it's made for people to see their ancestors celebrated and their stories told. It's really key to the way that things work in our culture now. There's a hunger for it, and a hunger for believing that people matter after they die, and that people don't only matter while they're alive. So I'm asking for that investment from each of us. I think what it leads to is it leads to a strengthening of tradition. It leads to a tradition of history that gets passed on intergenerationally. And what we're going to see as a result is a broadened internet, a broadened sense of representation that shows intergenerational connection between youth, adults, and elders, but also celebrates the incredible, powerful value of the ancestors. Thank you very much.